Good evening. So, my name's Bob Perrins. I'm the acting Vice President Academic at Acadia. So I'd like to welcome everyone tonight to the beautiful Annapolis Valley and town of Wolfville and our campus. So on behalf of everyone at Acadia, I welcome you to the 9th Annual Thomas Raddall Symposium for Atlantic Canadian Literature. So I would also like to acknowledge the fact that where we are situated is also on traditional First Nations Mi'kmaq land. So I think this is something we should keep in mind over the course of the next couple of days while we have the conference and discussions on the literature that we will be talking about. And also on behalf of the administration, and I think the people in this building where I used to live more regularly, I would also like to thank Andrea Schwenke Wyile for all the incredible work she has done in organizing this conference. So Andrea has put in a tremendous amount of work, and I see many familiar faces in the room. I see Gwen Davies at the back. So it's good to have friends coming back to our campus, and it's nice now that summer has finally arrived, I think. So I think it's finally arrived 2 days ago, after a winter that didn't seem to end. So enjoy yourselves in the sun and sort of the lush surroundings, make friends, and I hope you have a very successful conference. Thank you.
So hello everyone, I'm Laurie Dalton, for those of you who I haven't met yet. Lots of new faces, which is exciting. I'm the director-curator of the art gallery. I'm also one of the co-curators of this exhibition. So I hope after the evening's roundtable that you have some time to investigate and really see the exhibition. I just want to say a few words about how this kind of exhibition came to be, and then I'll pass the torch over to Andrea, who will do the formal introduction for our evening. So the idea behind this exhibition, Andrea had approached me about this exhibition quite some time ago, and things in gallery land move incredibly slow, and she was really patient. And then I said, okay, let's do this exhibition. And part of my interest in this exhibition, I really think it speaks to the strength of university galleries, is university galleries in many respects are creative laboratories. They're spaces where we can experiment and where we can ask questions. And that's really about what this exhibition is. It's two researchers coming together and collaborating, and what we see is this exhibition that's been put together. And the idea behind the exhibition is looking at the relationship between image, word, and design, and the process that goes into picture books. What we really wanted people to also think about is how do we look at a work differently when it's presented in a book, when it's framed on a wall, or when it's matted, or when it's not framed at all. So a particular element when you walk around this exhibition is you'll notice that actually very few things are actually framed, and they're all pinned to the wall. And part of it is to really create this idea of kind of an active workspace, which is the process of book design, but also the process of an artist or an illustrator. So it's kind of one of the elements we're trying to get across. I invite you, though, to come back, because there's going to be a whole bunch of other tactile elements in the exhibition that is hard to do tonight, because we're kind of sardines at the moment, but there'll be a story kind of in all these little tents. There'll be little books available, so I invite adults, you can fit in them, children as well, to kind of crawl in and spend some time reading the books that are on display. There'll also be some crafts and other opportunities. For those of you, I know you're going to focus only on what's being said tonight, but if your eyes wander, on the pillars are different excerpts of the books that are on display. So one, Lobster in My Pocket, Merry-Go Day, Powwow Nights, and then Jack and
Many Jacks.
one of the Jacks. I always forget which one's on the many Jacks. But really, I want to thank you all for coming, but I also want to thank Andrea. But before I do a formal thank you to Andrea, I also want to thank my lovely summer student, Emily, who has been up for all the random, hey, let's try and put ribbons on pillars this week conversation. So thank her for that, for all her help with that, and also the great staff at Acadia that we often don't see. So the cleaning staff that comes in and makes this space, as much as an old space can look clean, and the lighting staff and the crew and all these people that helped to put the exhibition together that aren't here tonight. So a big thank you to them, but again, also to Andrea. It's been a really interesting process working with her. I've learned so much about picture books, and I really thank her for her lovely patience as well. But again, over to Andrea, and thank you all for coming tonight.
thank you. Of course, I need to thank Lori for agreeing to allow me to perpetuate this vision in which there's not only a conference, but also an exhibit that happens to coincide with it. I would also like to say that the Box of Delights, the delightful bookstore in Wolfville that always shows up for all these author, artist events that I seem to organize, is located in the back room with a wide array of books from these authors and illustrators, but also many other Atlantic artists and academics. So visit them somewhere later after we rise from our seats. Another thing I wanted to mention, you'll notice there are all these lights and cameras because Dave Sheehan and Rob Lepper are taping this. So eventually this panel, along with the fabulous interview we did this morning with Andy Jones and Darka Erdelji, will be on a site called C-Stacks, which is all about Atlantic Canadian children's literature. And on the back little wall over there, there are some postcards that have the old website, which will take you to the new website because the website is just migrated to UNB. And so there you can see, if you're really fascinated by some of these conversations, Brenda Jones has an interview on that site. Sheree Fitch does, and so does Deirdre Kessler. So if you were intrigued or you wish you could hear them again, there is another opportunity to hear them there. And if any of you are teachers, you can also use that as a resource. So that's what I want to say about that. And I'd like to thank everybody who helped me organize this and make it happen. And now let's move on to the really exciting and interesting part in which we get to hear from these people. So what we've asked the artists, and we'll do the artists first. Oh, and I should say, sadly, Leonard Paul is not with us this evening. He informed me last week that unfortunately he wasn't going to be able to come because he just had one grandchild born and there was another one about to be born any minute, and he said, really, I would like to be here for the birth of my grandchild, so I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to be there with you. So it's too bad for us, but perhaps he will give a workshop at some later point. So what we've asked the artists, we'll have the artists first and then the authors, and we've asked them to each speak for a few minutes talking about whatever they felt like, but mostly we asked them to talk about their artistic process, how they became involved in picture book illustration, what their relationship is either with authors or designers, because as you'll discover, it's very different in each individual case. It has a lot to do with who you're publishing with. Often, illustrators and authors don't even talk to one another. The book just somehow happens. So we'll find out a little bit about that, and obviously, following the theme of the overall exhibit, the relationship between image, word, and design. So we will begin with Brenda Jones, and then Darka Erdelji, and then we'll move to the authors, and I'll introduce them at that point. So please join me in welcoming the authors.
I'd like to thank Acadia for inviting me here tonight. It's really an honor being up here with so many talented artists and writers. To be honest, I find it a little bit surreal talking about my work as an illustrator. I guess many artists can relate to this, but I've always been my own worst critic, and sometimes I feel like an imposter. Why would anybody want to know my creative process? I suppose that's one of the hurdles we all face as we get into creating, battling with our own negative mind, but we fight our way through and accept the fact that it's going to take time and a lot of practice to get where we want to be, and I'm still not there yet. I got my first start in illustration was back in 1980 while I was working at a boring job as a clerk in a department store in Montreal. I was on the verge of quitting my job and going out to work as a street artist when I heard through a friend of a friend of a friend that there was an animated movie being made in Montreal called Heavy Metal, and they were looking for artists. I had no art education, very little in my portfolio, but I went to apply anyway. They sat me down at a desk, gave me a brush and some inks, and I was told to color a background. I guess I must have done it right, or at least they saw some potential there because they gave me a job. It was a turning point in my life because the two people who were there to judge my work became lifelong friends, along with many other people that I've worked with in animation over the years. For the first time, I realized that despite what I was told all my life, I could actually make a living as an artist. I worked with a lot of talented people over the last 30 years in the animation business, and it was really from them that I got my art education. It was there that I learned how to use ink, squash, watercolor, and eventually Photoshop. The only drawback, if you want to call it that, was that animation was contract work. So I often spent several months a year unemployed. Mind you, I had lots to do being a single mother, but I needed to pay the bills. I had always dreamed of illustrating children's books, so I began sending examples to different publishers all across Canada, but with no luck. Then my brother, who owned a bookstore in Charlottetown, suggested I go to see the editor at Ragweed Press. And that was where I got my first job illustrating a book called Lobster in My Pocket by Deirdre Kessler. Since then, I've done many more books for Ragweed and subsequently Nimbus, which bought the rights when Ragweed closed its doors. Now, we were told to focus on the process of illustrating a book. I find that a little difficult because every book is different. Some stories are hard to visualize and take time to create, while others seem to just flow effortlessly. Time restraints can be a factor, as well as difficulties in our life unrelated to the story, which disrupt the process. For example, I illustrated a book called My Mother is Weird by Rashna Gilmore, which describes how a mother experiences mood changes and can sometimes be a bit cranky, particularly in the morning before coffee. I'm sure a lot of people can relate. I happened to be going through a divorce at the time, so when I sent in the preliminary sketches, I was told to tone it down. Apparently, the mother's claws and fangs were a little bit too scary. It just goes to show how life's ups and downs can be reflected in our work, sometimes unconsciously. So to get back to the process, generally when I first read a manuscript, I have a pencil in my hand, doodling in the margins and dividing it into pages as I go along. When I'm happy with the general layout, I make up a little book about this big and paste in the text and do a rough sketch on each page, and that gives me a general idea of what I want the book to look like. Then I'll do a full-size drawing for each page, taking into account the position of the text on the page. Then this is scanned into the computer, cleaned up, adjusted if necessary for proportions or layout, and then reprinted and transferred onto paper or board for the final painting. And then the finished painting is then rescanned into the computer, cleaned up, and the text added on another layer. It's quite a long, involved process. Most stories I receive are full of imagery, and it's easy to visualize what will go on the page. But I have to admit, when I received the lyrics of the hockey song by Stompin' Tom Connors, that was a challenge. How do you make a book of 24 pages out of a song where 50% of the lyrics are the good old hockey game is the best game you can name, and the best game you can name is the good old hockey game? It's not very much imagery there. I literally had to create another story within the story where a family rooting for different teams watches the game on TV. This at least gave me 4 characters to work with, plus a dog and a cat, which are always a little bit exciting, and the dynamics between them made for a bit of action outside of the game itself, even if there was no mention of it in the text. Of course, my earlier books were all done without the aid of a computer, and as I was often working a full-time job, my time then was at a premium. I'm finding now that I'm semi-retired, I have more time to complete a book. And I spend too much time agonizing over details and proportions, changing this and that in Photoshop just because I can. And whereas years ago, I was forced to be more spontaneous, and if you made a mistake, you had to let it go. To be honest, there are times when I'm ready to unplug the computer, ditch the camera, and go back to the basics. Because the only way to be truly creative is to allow yourself to go to a place where logic and proportion are irrelevant, where the mind no longer controls your brush. Paint outside the lines, create imaginary creatures, make the sky purple and the grass pink. I don't know if my publisher would agree with me, but... So to conclude, I'd like to quote Pablo Picasso. Every child is an artist. The hard part is staying an artist when you grow up. Thank you.
Oi, oi. How can I say anything after this? I don't know. I guess I start to paint because I don't like to talk. So I guess when I was really small, like we all start like that way, like was creating our own little words. I don't know, I build them sometimes from the stick, sometimes from the clay, sometimes from the mud which I found around, sometimes from the textile. But I love paper. I really like paper, so I guess this is one of my big passion is the paper. Paper can be everything. It's two-dimensional, but can form to the three-dimensional thing. And so I always interested about different different way how to create these little words. So I don't know that I really start to do illustration. I think I first start to make puppets. And I start to make puppets because I think there was everything. It was like painting, was sculpturing, was like after you can play with them and you can create your work even like with moving them around, talk with each other, and so I start from there. But I found out like sometimes it's hard to communicate with. You have many people in the theater, and sometimes you get tired of all these communications and try to do something right that is for everybody right, and so I think I like to escaping in the illustrations in this work when you work alone. And I must say I'm really lucky I work with Marnie and Andy, who have really great patience with me, so and don't let me pretty much do a lot which maybe other people will not. But all it started like this, that with Andy I start to work first puppets too. We work in some small community in Cowhead, and I think first moment when I invite him on a chicken, when I come from away and there was like big summer and I come in Cowhead and was like constantly light and snow. So I don't know, I wasn't met nobody yet, and my husband was working in the theater and was technician whole day. He was working, I was alone with 2 kids and keep waiting when will be this nice weather when I can take them out. So I was kind of bored and I wasn't know what to do with them. I was used to be outside all the time, and I keep waiting and I figure out this will never happen. We'll be just forever wind and mousses and cold, and then I was really happy when Jason wants to bring Andy on the supper. So I tried to make good chicken, and then we talk, and was, I don't know, for me it was like a love at first sight. I could talk with him, everything was like, I don't know, so we talk about like, especially folklore, and I don't know, we both have that love to the people and their old ways, how they live. I don't know, this customs, old customs, the way how they coming together and tell the stories. And I found out we are not so much different. Like no matter if I'm coming from another world, from one place which was long million years ago, like Pannonian Sea, and the sea disappeared, and I found out all my life looking for that sea. So I was restless all the life, so long I wasn't found Newfoundland. And that was my second part of my heart, and which is divided by the sea, but connected and tied together with the longings all the time. So I try to live in both sides, and I'm really grateful for that opportunity. I can work with Andy and Marnie, and so they're letting me still be part of Newfoundland. And I don't know what else to tell. I don't know. Maybe it's better when you ask me questions.
And there will be a chance for questions once we've heard from them all. So now we have 3 writers, and the other thing I need to explain is that in my original vision, my very complex vision of this symposium, it was also going to be bilingual. So I thought, well, we must have, I don't know, I couldn't speak for what academics or teachers or whatever were going to come forward and provide proposals. But I thought, well, I will invite a French publisher, so Bouton d'Or Acadie is here and will be speaking at the publishers panel tomorrow at the market at 2 o'clock. And so I invited Sophie Bérubé as one of the writers, and she will read for us in English tonight, though really she mostly works in French. And Deirdre Kessler, you will have already heard about because she's the author of Lobster in My Pocket. And Sheree Fitch, I don't think too many people know who she is, but you will soon find out. So I think we can just kind of start in the middle with Deirdre and work our way to Sheree. All right?
The process. After supper tonight, I'm tempted to lie. There was such good storytelling going on at our table. I was thinking, I'm going to do what Shoshana was saying. You just get drunk and then you do stuff. My writing process, I write for a living. I'm a full-time writer and part-time teacher at the university, and so my writing process varies according to what I'm writing. A couple of months ago, Oberon Press asked me to write something for their series. It's a memoir, but it's an extended conversation about something. This is the series that David Hellwig edits. And this is about my family background, starting with mother. That's a portrait of my mother by her first husband. So that process was talking with my writing the stories, and then talking with my family and showing my family the manuscript. Is this what you remembered, or who did that? And it's not a chronology at all. It's really, but it's just a little excursion into the political and labor history of a certain era and what means home. Prince Edward Island is home to me, but what else is home? So that was quite a different process. When I was about 13, I started keeping a journal. And one day in school, I had the drop-dead thought that my mother or my sister might have gone in my room and found my journal. And I didn't leave school, but as soon as school was over, I went home and I checked in my room. I don't know if you ever did this. You take a hair and you put it in a certain way across a drawer. So if somebody opens that drawer, the hair is moved, or the things. And I was so relieved that the hair was in place. I truly was panicked. So I took my journal and I went out, we had a burn bin, remember the old days? and I ripped up my journal and burned it. And I didn't start keeping a journal again until I was 17 when I left home, because I realized that what I write in my journal is so important and immediate to me, and so frank. So I still keep a journal, and if I die, you have to burn it. You can rip out, I do paintings, and you can rip out any of those you like, as long as there's nothing that's too incriminating on the backside. But so I keep a journal, and part of the process of writing poetry is to write poems here, or make notes, or overheard conversations, or story ideas. So it's a writer's journal that I keep, as well as the other kinds of journaling things that are there. And if I'm working on something, a contract, I won't mention any books, because say a nonfiction I'm contracted to do, say it's an educational text. I just get up in the morning and I take a deep breath and I say, I'll write 1,000 words today, or if it's a really hard, I'll do all the research, and then I take a deep breath and say, okay, I'll just do one more subhead. I'll just do that. And when I'm in it, I'm interested. But when I'm writing fiction, I get up 3:30 or 4 in the morning, and I make coffee, and I'm in. I just write for 4, 5, 6 hours. And I'm happy, but I don't want to talk to anybody. So I have friends who say, when you're writing a novel, we know not to call you or to talk to you about too much, because I want to be in there. And I live alone, it's easy to be, I'm sort of hermity. Anyway, what I thought I would do, there are other things of the process. I love what Brenda said. I love working with Brenda Jones. We just finished another big book together. And my mother was an artist, a visual artist, so I always think I'm pretty visual, but then work with an artist, and all of a sudden it's a whole other. I never thought of that, and the way another collaborator, a creative person, can take one's material and then make magic the way Brenda does is a marvelous experience. Although I've worked with some other artists, and I have 17 children's books and young people's books. I've worked with some not so pleasant artists too. But we won't talk about them. So I thought I would read 3 poems, since thank you for this wonderful conference, Child, Youth, and Place in Atlantic Literature. I'll read 3 poems. The first one, you'll recognize the place because it's here. And it's from a collection of adult poetry called Afternoon Horses, and it's called The Names of Things. He's 4 now, puts on his own little clothes, speaks in complete sentences, tells me he lives in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and has been to many places: Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, and the zoo. What do you see at the zoo? Giraffes and lions and afternoon horses. He is eating blueberries picked the day before in a field above diked marshlands, Annapolis Valley highbush berries, the flock of family browsing in the same reverie. And what are afternoon horses? They go places in the afternoon. That's how it is with the world, the names of things, blueberries in a green bowl, a child on his knees on a chair, eating with a big spoon, discussing life. So that's called The Names of Things. And then here's a recent poem about the same child, Summer at the Cottage. And the journal comes in. If the children in the family say something, I'm good about writing things down. It's hard to remember syntax and exact words. Do you remember your first word, or your children's or grandchildren's first words or first sentences? And anyway, this one's called Summer at the Cottage. Early July, and he is exactly 2 years old. Fair skin, fair hair, a delicate boy in every way. Hand in hand down the steep slope we go, down to the lake, dusk, quiet. We wade in shallow water, listen for frogs, pick up bright stones, and there's one red leaf floating. He picks it up. We wonder why only one leaf red, all the rest green. We hear the splash of paddles, low voices, a couple in a canoe passing by. "Hello," the child calls out into the darkness. "I'm two." "Hello," they call back. He holds up the leaf. "Look," he says, "I'm having a leaf." He holds up the leaf, but it's too dark for them to see it, and they're too far away. He must appear to them a sprite, ankle deep in water, little body, pale and flawless, glowing with life. And the last one is called Dusky Seaside Sparrow. Let's see if I can find it here. I remember June 18th, 1987, the Washington Post had this headline. It was in the New York Times and in the Globe and Mail in a smaller place, but this was in the Washington Post headline, not on the main page. "Goodbye, dusky seaside sparrow. Last bird's little heart will be frozen, awaits cloning advances." That little dusky seaside sparrow died in captivity in Disney World the day before, June 17th, 1987, in Florida. And it was a canary-sized bird, and it only ranged about 2 kilometers from home in the marshland, Merritt, the land that was cleared for development, not far from the space shuttle and Disneyland, Merritt Island. Anyway, that wetlands was cleared, and the remaining 7 dusky seaside sparrows were taken to a sanctuary, and this last one died on this date, and they called it Orange Band because it had a little orange band around its leg to identify this one. So here's the poem. Sorry, the prelude is way longer than the poem. Dusky seaside sparrow. "Read 4 stories, she says. It's late, 2 stories. No, 4. You need sleep, little girl. 2 stories tonight. 3 stories. 2. But will you lie with me a while? After the stories, she needs stories. Always a winding down from the day with this child. Rituals to calm, to prepare her for being left alone with night demons. Don't go yet. I must go soon. It's time for you to sleep. Her eyelids are heavy. It won't be long before she crashes. The transition infinitesimal. I begin to extricate myself from her side. Her eyes fly wide. She sits up, fully awake, asks, "Who will be the last baby in the world?" Thank you.
Bonsoir tout le monde. So I won't speak much more French, but I've been asked to say a few words of French. I might do a few sentences here and there. So I'm very grateful to be part of this symposium and to be here tonight in this panel. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm a writer who writes in French, and I live here, right here in the Valley, so I'm often a little isolated with my work, so it's always fun to be able to come out and be in the world here in my community and do a reading, so thank you very much for that. I write mostly because I'm always thinking. There's always ideas, there's always things going in my mind, and they're going. And one thing that helps me when I write is I can kind of go after the idea, lasso it, and then boom, I've got one. And then that can calm a little bit the rest of the other ones that are still running wild again. And once I have that idea, I kind of try to go, okay, what am I going to do with it? And you don't want to kill it. So it's a very tricky process because it's not like you want to take the idea and just go bang, 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 that's the idea. You want to keep it alive. You want to keep it so that it has the beauty, the kind of wildness that it had when you caught it. So that's the challenge. And that's kind of the process that I'm working with all the time, is keeping up with the ideas and putting them down in a way that still has that grace, that beauty that they have when they're free, when they're wild out there. So that's kind of the premise to my process as a writer. And so I have a story that I thought I would share some parts of with you tonight. It's called Le Chef-d'œuvre de Lambry, which in English would be called Lambry's Masterpiece. If anybody's interested in publishing it in English, just let me know after tonight. I'd be totally open to doing that. Actually, it's one of the things that I would love to do, is get some of my work out in English, but it's not happening very fast, and I keep writing in French, so it's tricky. So when I thought about the process of writing for me, and I was looking at this little story, which is my first book. It's been published a long time ago, but I have an English translation for it, so I thought, well, this is a good one to bring tonight. And I realized that this story is really about my creative process. It's the story of a little earthworm who's an artist, and he creates a masterpiece, or she. In French, I translated it. He's him in French, and in English, I want him to be a she. That's my own business, right? So I might get mixed up, but she's a she. We'll go from there. So she, Lambry, is. So she's an earthworm, and I start this book here with a quote by Charles Darwin, who wrote, "Worms have played a more important part in the history of the world than most persons would at first suppose." So Lambry is kind of, for me, stories happen when there's a little bit, and for all of us, I think, but anyway, it's like when there's a little bit of a conflict, there's a little bit of a pull in different directions. And so Lambry was based on a scientific concept that earthworms are really important to have a healthy biodiversity. They're right in there, and they're creating basically the world that we live in, because without them there'd be no plants, without, we won't go on, but you know what I'm after, right? So there was that scientific concept of this is like a really important creature to biodiversity, and I don't want to point fingers, but the guy standing over there was one who gave me that idea. So, and the other side that came up when I started to write the story about this earthworm who's central to biodiversity, as I started typing, he was an artist. So there I had science and art pulling in two directions. And that was great. That was kind of it brought the story together. So the process, I kind of outlined it a little bit. So for me, there's a spark. There's a little tiny little boom of inspiration out there. And sometimes it's just an image and it becomes a book. Sometimes it's just a little scenery, whatever. So there's a flash. And I want to harness it. And then once I have the flash, I need to sit down and start it. And then that's the first challenge, is finding that starting place. Where do I start to tell that story? And then comes the work, and then you work some more. And then after you work for a while, you kind of curse yourself and you say, why did I want to write this? This is crazy. But then you go, no, shut up, just keep working. And then sometimes there's a small miracle that happens. And it's like, oh yeah, this all makes sense now. And then you finish, and there's a little bit of satisfaction, a sense of peace. And then boom, you're back at it again, because there's another idea, and you're back through the cycle. So that's what happens to Lambry, but we'll just read it through one cycle. So the story starts with a little bookend, there's two bookend scenes at each end of the book. And I won't read that part, but it's basically a grandmother in her art studio. She's painting it on a canvas. Her granddaughter is sitting on a chair, and the granddaughter says, what are you painting there, and what gave you the idea for this painting? And the grandmother says, let's see, it's the story of a little earthworm who was quite special. Lambry, that was her name, lived on top of a hill in a clearing by the side of Gaspereau Lake, not too far from here. The clearing had the shape of a gigantic eye. In the winter, when all the leaves had fallen, eagles and crows, flying high above the forest, could see the big white eye of snow looking eagerly back at them in the blue sky. Of course, you probably think that it was pure chance the clearing was shaped like an eye. But Lambris, as tiny as she was, had a great influence on her surroundings. In fact, Lambris was not so little. As with all worms, she could shrink and shrivel like a sock, quickly taken off, and then she could stretch beyond measure until she was as long as an enormous spruce cone. The same kind of cones as the ones that grew on her neighbors, two old spruce trees called the Two Sisters. This pair of trees was named the Two Sisters because even though they were born from a single seed, they share only one trunk at the base, which then separated into two majestic stalks that towered into the sky. The sisters were musicians and spent many hours singing like fiddles under the wind's bow. Lambris spent her days working while happily listening to their melodies. The sisters were art lovers, and from their height, they had an incomparable view of Lambris' work. Lara, and that's the name of the granddaughter, Lara, you must be wondering about Lambris' work. She was an artist with a fabulous talent. I would even dare to say an expert in colors. You will tell me that a simple earthworm who cannot distinguish forms and colors, who can hardly make out the difference between light and dark, that such a creature could not possibly create colorful works of art. However, Lara, there are some things in nature that are not easily explained. At birth, as did her 20 or so siblings, Lambris hatched from the family nest. She was crawling with a little hesitation because, after all, this was her first outing into the big, wide world. All her siblings hurried to find shelter and food in the hollow, warm, and moist earth that surrounded them. Lambris just stretched her neck, or rather I should say her upper body, because we are talking about an earthworm here. And then she noticed a little blot of blue sky shining through the dark. Without thinking, Lambris wormed her way up to the surface of the earth. The dandelions, the rose bushes, the fireweed, the clovers, the daisies, mixed with the different shades of green from the grasses, the trees, and the bushes, were all presenting themselves to her like a great mosaic of colors. Lambris was so dazzled by this explosion of colors that she could not make out the shapes of the plants surrounding her. Mesmerized, she remained still. Suddenly, in the midst of this beautiful rainbow, the most exquisite color appeared to her. A little girl with deep blue eyes was staring at her. The girl was quite surprised to see such a tiny earthworm. Lambris looked intently at her eyes. These wide blue eyes were the first things that she was seeing clearly and distinctly in her entire life, however short it had been. This encounter lasted only a few instants. The little girl continued her walk in nature, and Lambris began her worm life. From then on, the image of these child's eyes with perfectly round pupil was etched in Lambris' mind. So that would be the flash, the inspiration part. Lambris sees these eyes. So back to Lambris' work. She was indeed an artist. Instead of using paint or crayons to create her pictures, she used plants, rocks, and soil. Over the years, she had shaped the clearing to give it the appearance of an enormous eye. A big black rock in the middle of the clearing inspired her to create her giant eye. So she crawled into this clearing, there's a rock, she's inspired, she's going to create a gigantic eye. So I'm going to skip a little bit. She pushes branches, she creates this, she puts plants all around the clearing, ferns like eyelashes, Queen Anne's laces that are like the white of the eye. And she's got the rock as the pupil, but she's missing the middle part, which is the iris. So Lombry's work of art was almost complete. The two sisters were constantly complimenting her about it. They even composed a melody in her honor. It was called Ode for Celestial Eye. And I think we're going to have to stop here, so you won't get to see how it mimics all those steps that I talked about in the process of writing. If you're interested, the book is there, and anyone who wants, I'll send you a copy of the English version. So you could buy the French version and have the English version to make sure you understand everything. So that was lovely to chat with you tonight, and thank you very much.
Simply discombobulating, jumbled up and mumbling, topsy-turvy tumbling, tipsy-tummy tied in knots, spiral, gyro, spiraling, swiveling like anything, absolutely apple-carted downside up, simply discombobulating, jumbled up and mumbling, topsy-turvy tumbling, in other words, I'm dizzy. So I am a very weird person, and that's why I write. And I say weird in a weird word person. I am obsessed with language, and I'm obsessed with words. And whether it's a word that I just fall in love with and obsess, or whether it's words that come spilling out of my children's, not anymore, they're 40 and 35, now 40 years old and 35, but it would be my grandchildren now, don't you do that or you might stick your toes in your nose. Oh, toes in your nose, I think I hear something, I can work with it. And so writing poetry is very, very different than writing a novel or writing prose, and so I keep saying that I'll never know all there is to know about writing any more than I'll ever know all there is to know about being a human being. And that's one of the reasons why I love it so much. I have a problem because I have a mind that's like a ping pong, very much like that. So I have way more things in my file folders that aren't finished than things that ever got finished and put in a book. And I don't throw them out, so I have a lot of paper in my house. And that can be a good thing, but there comes a point, especially when you're writing a novel, where you have to get what's called a steel trap moment and nothing else, and you block out the whole world, and then nothing else matters. So I'm going to give you, I wanted to talk specifically because of the, thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you so much, Lori, and this conference. Sitting in this audience tonight are people here that I have to acknowledge before I go any further. There is Eileen Wallace, who is sitting right here. Now, Eileen worked at the University of New Brunswick, Eileen Wallace Children's Literature Collection, but my mother was secretary in the Faculty of Education. And when I started writing, I was 20 years old, 22 years old, and I was like showing things, and my mother would take them in and show people at the Faculty of Education. Mary Lou Sterling was one of the first people to say, you know what, Sheree, have you ever read Shel Silverstein? And I go, no, who's he? But I was playing with words, and I was this mother with, 20-year-old mother with a 2-year-old, and I really did start writing for him. But when I decided that I would take instead of saying it's just this little thing I do, which I did for a long time, and decided I wanted to write the best nonsense I could, I went to university and I studied under a wonderful children's literature professor who's in the audience here, and his name is Dr. Russ Hunt. And he is here, and he's also the reason. So between Eileen and Russ, Anne, who is my friend and has been his wife, my lifelong friend, but the children's literature community was so important to me, because remember, there was a time when it was called kitty litter. And when I graduated from St. Thomas, I looked and looked and looked and looked and looked for a place in Canada that I could study Canadian children's literature, because I still wanted to write that very best nonsense poem I could write, and I was taking my nonsense seriously. I came to Acadia and I studied under the wonderful Dr. Hilary Thompson, and Ray is here tonight as well. So thank you to Acadia and all my teachers. I should say my writing process has been affected profoundly by all the support and all the study that I did as well. So even though the inspirational bursts come from my own head, the more I studied, the more I knew I would never know all there was to know about writing. So I'm going to give you an example of how, and I'll talk about this book in a minute, but I'll give you an example of how my brain might work when my children are little. So I have a dog, and he comes in the kitchen, and we're in the crazy middle of a morning, like you are with children, and I was on my own then, and the dog was a beagle dog, and I dropped a piece of bagel on the floor, and we're getting ready, and I go, get ready, get your school books, do your things. And I'm like, wait, biggle, bagel. Oh, biggle, bagel. I can do something with that, okay? So immediately, that's how my poet brain would go. Biggle, bagel, I can do something with that. So I tuck it in, I try, but biggle, bagel doesn't go anywhere. So then I'm in British Columbia, and I'm in a library waiting for like 200 kids to come in so I can do some storytelling. And there's a great big picture of a beluga whale. And it's so beautiful. And I'm like, beluga, what a great word, beluga. Beluga belongs with Biggle and Bagel. And I put that back down there. Okay, Biggle, Bagel, Beluga. Okay, do that, and I do that, and I try. Nothing happens, okay? And then 3 years later, I'm still working on that, but nothing happens. And then I get asked to do a book called If You Could Wear My Sneakers. It was poetry based on the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And when they asked me to do that, I was like, no, I only work from inspiration. And they were like, but we'll give you a contract. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe I can, write... money will do that to you too, but it was amazing going through that process because I still wanted the poetry to be really, really good and not didactic and all of that stuff. So then I went, maybe I can finish that Biggle, Bagel, Beluga poem. So it ended up, I knew a Biggle who loved bagels. In fact, he loved to beg for bagels. In fact, he wagged his tail for bagels and haggled for those bagels whenever bugles blew. One day the Biggle met a Beluga who played the boogie woogie bugle. The Biggle giggled, hi Beluga, then played a jig with his kazoo. Then the Biggle and the Beluga eating bagels, blowing bugles met an eagle who was eager to eat some buttered bagels too. So the Biggle and the Eagle and the Bugle playing Beluga sailed together, saw the 7 million wonders of the world. It was a boondoggling, mind-waggling, hornswoggling time they played the boogie woogie eager eagle Biggle Beluga blues. Okay, that's how it works. It really is. I mean, how many people would, spend 7 years on nonsense? You've got to be, I call it magnificent obsession, maybe compassionate obsession. I do hear words like musical notes, and it doesn't have to rhyme. And in this book, Mary Godet, I really experimented a lot with, free verse, and I wanted a book that, would kind of, I wanted to be E.E. Cummings is what I wanted to do. It didn't quite work, and so I thought I would just show you. But this is about, in Fredericton, New Brunswick, every year they have an exhibition. And so Molly Lambeau lived in Fredericton. And when people in Fredericton look at this, they really think it's a Fredericton exhibition. People in Toronto think it's the Toronto exhibition. But it really started when I had my 2 children and we were standing in line. And, when you're a poet, you can have 2 choices. You can either be really frustrated by standing in line and waiting, or you could go, oh, this is a really good opportunity to look around and see if I can write a poem. So it begins standing in line, all the little kids whine, fathers get hot, mothers grumble a lot, and you wait, and you wait, and you wait, and you wait till at last you're the ones at the front of the gate. And I knew that I'd found a way to enter into the world of the exhibition. And, I could hardly wait to get home. I think we got sick on one of the rides that night. But I could hardly wait to get home and try to capture the energy of the exhibition. And so that's really what I tried to do in this book. I really was trying to get the energy of certain rides even into it. So I hop on a new car, a blue car, a new car, but a rubber bumper car doesn't get very far until bump, until bam, until somebody ram, bumper you over there with the long black hair, bumper you in the hat, take this, take that, bumper you in the green, bumper me in between, bumper bump, bumper bam. It's a traffic jam. I'm a bumper car, bumper bumping, bumper cars, bam. And so when you do that in school with children, they get it. And what I loved about I have a bumper car theory of the universe now, because, but it's true, because you watch people, they're in line going up, and they're like, hi, how are you? Oh, I see someone over there, everybody's really nice. And then they open up the gates, and they got in those bumper cars, and people, they grew horns. All of a sudden it was, and they would get off and leave, and it would go away, and they go, bye, see you later. But for just a little while, there was this fierceness because you knew you could get it all out, but nobody was going to be hurt. And so for me, this is a little microcosm of the world. And in the book, the girl keeps trying to win a purple plaret. So every once in a while, the thread in the narrative through this, and I like poetry that also has a narrative thread so that there's a sense of completion, or the desire that you talk about, a little bit of friction, all of that stuff that to make a story out of poetry is kind of a different kind of thing. But in this one, she keeps trying to get the purple parrot and trying to get the purple parrot. And at the end of the book, she doesn't get the purple parrot. So you don't know how many. So all the way she's going, there's my parrot, purple parrot with the green and pink striped nose. And then she's like, I try, I miss. I try, I miss. I try, I miss. But I'll be back, parrot. So she keeps doing it. And you're so sure she's going to get the parrot at the end of the book. Like, what kind of person would do that to a child? Like, not let them get the purple parrot. But I want you to know, I agonized over it. Does she get it? Doesn't she get it? Doesn't she get it? Doesn't she get it? Doesn't she get it? And I remember the editor going, Sheree, she has to get the parrot. I'm like, I'm sorry, she doesn't get the parrot. So I'm just going to read you the very end of that. So, yeah, that's it. So where she goes back and she goes, this is the last time she's going, purple parrot as you hang there with your green and pink striped nose, make a wish that I will win you. This is it. One more time. Here it goes. I try, I miss. I try, I miss. I try, I miss. The end. I don't have a purple parrot. I don't have a purple friend. And then she goes home, and she goes into bed. I lie in bed listening to the faraway screams of people still riding the midnight rides in the midnight sky. Exhibition day was fun. Exhibition day is done, but I still can't help thinking of that parrot, purple parrot with the green and pink striped nose. It's like the man who took my money said, well, kid, that's the way it goes. But listen, pop, bang, whistle, whiz, fireworks exploding, spidery legs of light, fizzle, sizzle, fizz, summer night, and look, there's my parrot, purple parrot, in a blaze across the sky. I'll be back next year, I whisper. This is good night. So when Molly, thank you. So every book, like everybody said, every book is so different and the process is so different. And yes, there have been books that have come out with texts that I go, well, it's like a bad haircut, I'll grow into it. There have been a few, but very, very, very few. I've really loved the collaboration with all the artists over the years. The thing about writing a novel is you don't get that. Very rarely have I seen the process. I usually don't see it until the end. They wouldn't tell me to change a word. I wouldn't actually like to tell them to change something. Sometimes I'll say something, the managing editor will tell the artist. But in this one, Molly was so generous because she said to me, what? I said, Molly, at the end, the reason she doesn't get the purple parrot, it's because for me, there's still the possibility of next year and the next time. And do we always get what we want? And that was why when the kids would say, why didn't she get it? I look right at the children in the school and I go, do you always get everything you want? And of course they'd be going, yes. I go, no, you don't. So Molly was so wonderful because she really, of course, for those of you who know, Molly was, Canada's, I think, only female war artist. I think she was certainly, there were maybe very few. And she did my first book, Toes of My Nose. And this book, after it was done, it's very hard for an artist who's not used to having somebody go back and change it, to have to do that over and over. And there is the original notebook with her original sketches in it that the gallery will have over this summer, and I'll get it back at the end of the summer. But you can see the editor's notes on it too. So I'm going to end with a poem that I think is about all of us. It's not just about being an artist or a writer. It's and again, I wrote this. Not everything rhymes, but because I think sometimes I'm doing it for somebody. But I think ultimately, the joy or the self-reflection that I get are little prayers to myself sometimes. So this is called "Do Your Best Under the Circumstances." Goes like this. There is no land of perfect, child. There is no sea of ease. There is no candy apple trail. There's broccoli and peas. There is no suit of armor, child. There's arrows and there's pain. And when your heart is broken, child, stay strong and love again. There is no perfect person, child, not presidents or queens. There's only all us trying, child, to be human beings. Mm-hmm.
So just to quickly summarize, it's a question about how much research do you need to do? Do you do research?
Well, for the book that we did together with Deirdre here, it was born
Born a foal,
foal,
5 kittens, and Confederation.
And yeah, that took a lot of research because it was based on history, and you had to have everything, all the costumes to the period of the time, and all of the scenes in Charlottetown had to be exactly, well, we figured that they should be the way it was back then, so we had to sift through a lot of archival pictures and things like that, and we did some research. We went out and visited horses and things like that. It was a lot of fun, actually. I learned a lot during the process, and, but it was very time-consuming. Most other books, no, because it's more fantasy and, you know, it all comes out of your head, but this one in particular had to be fairly precise. So.
Yes, the story is a 48-page picture book. Well, it's a 48-page picture book, 8 chapters, so it's long, twice as long as many children's picture books. And I did a tremendous amount of research, even though I knew for what child is interested in Confederation. What would a 9, 10, 11-year-old really care about politicians? You know, talking about maritime union, Confederation, so on. But things had to be accurate. I knew, of course, that a circus had come to town, and so the hotels were filled with people who hadn't seen a circus in 22 years, and where was that circus held? I also found out that there was a cricket game, and the people in Charlottetown and across the island were far more interested. There was a cricket excursion. And so did a lot of research. Where do these people stay? But what would 2 children, the protagonists, see from their livery stable on Great George Street? And what would they care about? Well, they'd see people in fancy clothes, and they'd see a lot of commotion. But all the moments of historical detail, I wanted to be really accurate, because I guess we'd be tarred and feathered if they weren't. And ridden out of town on the rail if they're still, well, that's a different kind of rail. But because everyone knows island history, and one of our consultants, Dr. Catherine Hennessy, would say, no, that building burned down. It wouldn't have looked like this, it would have looked like this.
It burned down in 1863, so yes. It wouldn't have been there in 64, you know, so I had to change everything.
So we wanted it everything historically accurate, but for me, it's a horse story. Foal is born and the 5 kittens, and the other part of the story is that I knew from another book that I'd edited that Robert Harris, the famous portrait painter who painted the Fathers of Confederation, I knew from a letter that his mother wrote to Liverpool that when Robert was 14, he played in the band that played for the Fathers of Confederation. So Sir John A. Macdonald and George A.T. Brown, A.T.M. Brown, and so on. And that Robert Harris's mother had written home that some of the grand people had told him to stuff his pockets with good things to eat, so he had all kinds of good things to share the next day, but he played his cornet. He played violin and flute, and he also played cornet. So I made him a character relating to the children in the livery stable what was going on there at the Province House. So that was those are accurate. And also I know all the Harris collection from another book, and I knew that Robert Harris did little watercolors of the cricket game and of what Charlottetown looked like then. And we had a self-portrait and so on. And Brenda, there are portraits of Robert Harris by Brenda Jones, but we had a good idea what child Harris looked like. So it was tons of research for moments in the book, but they're correct. Damn it.
If anybody says they aren't.
The only time she made fun of me, because I looked what phase of moon, and the weather. I looked at, you can Google
Are you sure
1864.
those stars are up there in the sky?
I said, Brenda, this was the constellation in the northeast sky, and she laughed at me. Anyway. So yes, about the research.
I don't know, I guess with me it's a little bit different. I take imperatives, and I like that because I don't need too much this and can go more from stomach, I guess, or heart, or so. The point is, like, I always, when I start to draw, paint, I start with doodles too, because this is my favorite thing, and it's got the rhythms, and for me it's the most important rhythms of the story, how the images go, and I can never start like, people say, why don't draw this? You like this image just, like idea and visual thing. And I can't do it. I need to go in order because I need the rhythms. I need like where the colors are stronger, where disappearing, how the little doodles go, or like what they're doing, where they met this one place. This is, I guess, the most important, and the atmospheres. They're not looking for atmospheres. But it happens. Sometimes, of course, like I rely on this that I all the time watching around. I'm really interested about like small things, small details on the world. So when I'm in Newfoundland, I don't know, I can watch the fog, how it's rolling from the sea, or hours and hours and hours. Or I can, I don't know, like all those small things which are, so I try to catch more these than, of course, sometimes it's a problem because like Andy come and say like, where is peas pudding? You're supposed to do peas pudding. Where's this green peas? You know, in Newfoundland we have peas pudding and it's not green. And with these cakes, sometimes like, okay, I get lost and I get a little bit in my world and then I have to go back and do research, and so I'm not good if they let me completely alone. Every few times I need to check up if I don't float too far away and it doesn't take me somewhere. So, but in mainly I don't do too much research. Like I rely on this, I'm there, I rely on that feel of the things, of the whatever I see, like it's staying in, and then it's more about the atmosphere. I have that plug that I can do that it's looking for atmosphere and the little stories inside the stories. So it's not necessary that body was dressed in that time or.
Sophie, I think you have a lot to say about this.
About research?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess it's a little bit like what you're saying. I've been working on historical pieces, and of course, they demand a lot of research. I'm working on a project right now where I'm basing a story on Colonel Winslow's diary, the man who was coordinating the deportation at Grand-Pré. So it's kind of interesting research because there's so much. It's his whole diary. So I can, it's documented almost day after day what he did, and sometimes even what he ate or what. So that's kind of interesting to have that as a source. And I tend, when I do research, to go for primary sources. Like I like working with his diary rather than working with a book about Acadian history, because I find like this is it, this is real, and I like to go for the bottom of the pot and get the so that's I kind of enjoy doing that, but it is very minutious work. Like you have to really look and comb through, and then out of that, like there's no point, in this project in particular, I don't need to rewrite his diary. That wouldn't be a piece of fiction, right? So I need to dig in there and then try to bring out a story out of there that's my own creation, that probably has evidently has nothing to do with what Winslow experienced in Grand-Pré, but that's my making of it. Yeah.
I love reading, and so whenever I have a project that involves research, it's really dangerous because I would just keep reading and 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 never get to writing. So with novels, for example, The Grave Savers, yes, it was based on a historic incident that really happened. So, and again, I went back to like provincial archives and and it took me way too long to write that book because I just kept reading because I didn't know when to stop. Because the question for me was, like it used to be when I did essays in university, how do I know that I know enough to be able to say something that I think I know. You know, when do you stop and say, so for example, there's one sentence in The Grave Savers that mentions they're taking a train from Ashton-under-Lyne to Liverpool, and unless you were really into the book like I was, you'd never notice, but they say that they are getting wet, because that would be because they were in open cars, because they were a poor family, so they didn't have enough fare to be. So, of course, that's one sentence. People probably read it and say nothing. I can tell you I spent probably 2 months. I know everything about the rail line in that year that happened from Liverpool, England to, like, you know, so you have to know when. So now, the way I do research now, of course with poetry, it's my heart in what I'm hearing, and I mean, sometimes I might go stop and research a beluga whale if I really get that obsessed, but truthfully, what I'm doing now, it's 1968, it's Moncton, New Brunswick, I'm up to my earlobes in research again, and it's that thing about how do I stop? How do I know when to stop? And then go back and go into the story and tell the story I have to tell. So I have a real love-hate relationship with research. I would much rather just have it all spinning out of my imagination, and that makes it a little bit freer for me. But I know, like, I'm like Deirdre, like if I'm going to go to a date, I need everything to be authentic. Even if nobody else knows about that car, that they didn't, you know, that they got wet, I knew that they had to get wet. So that's kind of my relationship with it. Yeah.
All right, so just a question about readers. Who do you think about your audience as you're drawing or writing, or not?
Okay, I can speak to that. Do you want to start here, to this line or that line? Okay. So I can speak to that really. I know that I'm supposed to say no, I just write, but the truth is I write for the ear. Mostly poetry, storytelling is an oral tradition. So I am writing very much for the ear and the sound of the words, which means I'm also thinking of offering and of giving, that this is something that will come from me, from the air through the words. So of course, what I do is dependent upon a community of listeners in order for that text or the story to have its life. So in that sense, I see this, I mean, my thesis here at Acadia was about, you know, the community that is formed by the oral tradition of children's poetry. So that big sense, I really do. It cannot, you know, a book can't be a book unless it's read. A poem can't be a poem unless it's heard, in my mind. Okay, so there's that it's a sharing, so that there has to be someone to receive it. So that in that one sense I do. In terms of age group, I don't ever think of age group. I know publishers like to, and people like to. When people say, is that a YA book? I go, because it's that C.S. Lewis says that any book that is good enough for children must be a book that is also, you know, enjoyed by adults, or is good. It's a canon that he held. You don't dumb it down, you don't limit vocabulary, so I never write for an age group. The only exception was doing a board book. But even then I'm thinking the mother and the father have to like this board book, right? And then, or they're gonna go, not this again, right? So I'm still doing it, like writing what I would like to read, and hopefully as somebody else would. So that's just in a nutshell. It's more complicated. That's a really good question though too. And but for me, writing is an offering, it's a sharing, and so that implies that there's someone who will receive it. So on that level, yes.
I guess that when I write for children, I'm with you. I don't think like, oh, this is going to be for readers in grade 2, 3, 4, or whatever. It becomes a challenge for me because I do a lot of presentation with English-speaking children, where I read in French, or they're in French immersion or something like that. And my books are not simple. They're not. My language is not simple. I don't say, oh, I'm going to use really simple words so that all the, you know, non-French speaking kids that are listening to me are going to understand, and that makes it tricky sometimes, because I'm trying to read them a story and they're totally lost. And like with this book, I have the translation with me, and once in a while I'll wave to the teacher and say, let's just do a little section in English, just so they get a little bit the rhythm, the idea about the words behind that. And this past January, I published my first adult novel. And I had a wonderful editor who worked really, really closely with me to work on the story. And what was really interesting for me is I realized that I was writing, part of the book were written too much for the reader. Like I wanted my readership to understand what I was trying to say and all that. And the editor was wonderful because she really helped me. It's like I had put scaffoldings all over the text just to hold it together and to make sure that people got it. Like, do you really get it? Like, I'm going to say it again. And I'm going to say that another way to make sure if you didn't get it this way, then you get it that way. And she just looked at me and she just very gently pulled out all these little feeder sentences away, and it was like, wow, it holds. It was like, you know, we took off the mold and it was still standing after we did that. So that was a really nice experience, and teaching me as well, like, how do I write less to be understood in all the ways possible? How do I let go of that a little bit? So I don't know if that answers your question a bit, but.
I like that description. Scaffolding, pull the scaffolding away. I know I just said that the Born book, that I thought, what does a 9, 10, 11-year-old want to know about Confederation? That book was commissioned. I was free to write any story I wanted, but something to do with 1864, and I could decide grade 3, grade 6, and or what some general age. And once that was decided, then no, I just wrote the story. And the story, I write it for myself in that way. And I often mutter as it's an oral thing as well, because there's poetry a lot. Poetry is to be sung and said aloud generally. But also fiction has to work aloud. It has to have the cadences and rhythms, and so that if the story works aloud, and I know it's a children's book, not an adult book, but I don't edit myself. And I think of what Beatrix Potter said to her editor. Her editor wanted her to take it. Do you remember the scene in which the Flopsy bunnies get into Mr. McGregor's garden and they eat all the lettuce, and Beatrix Potter, all their little fat bellies, all the Flopsy bunnies are, asleep in the garden when Mr. McGregor comes in, and she said the Flopsy bunnies, because the lettuce had acted as a soporific. Well, if you look at the picture, they're all asleep. I remember that word when I was a child.
I remembered that word too.
See?
For some reason.
No, I didn't look it up in the dictionary. I wasn't. It's funny. That's where I learned soporific. But of course, that means that you're a rabbit and you eat too much lettuce and you fall asleep in the garden. And her editor said, that's too sophisticated a word, you have to take it out. And she said, no. That children need words like that. This is how we learn words like that. And so I think of that often, that these wonderful words, where do we learn them? Early.
Yeah, I don't think you can completely separate yourself from your audience when you're doing artwork anyway. I don't know about the literary process, but I think I always have kind of that in the back of my mind, that I'm drawing for children, because my colors and my subjects are very made to interest children, although I don't think it's conscious. I don't go out to say, well, I'm going to do this for children 4, 5, 6 years old. It doesn't enter my mind, but in some way I think it's always there, But I like to add little things into the pictures that only children would pick out, and that they would notice every time you flip the page, and sometimes the adults don't see these things, and, but that's about all. It's mostly for myself. I think that it's my own inner child, I think, that's coming out when I draw.
Yeah, I feel kind of the same, and especially I never want to compete with the text. I think text have his own life or its own life. So I never want to do exactly this what is written. I'm drawn to make stories inside of the stories, like sideways, like layers and layers of the things, which maybe somebody see, maybe not, but it's like a Swedish table, it's there. So you choose what is close to you and you create your own. So I think the reader or the one who took the picture book, it's have to have space to put their own feelings, their own experience into this and create the world for itself, I don't know, for herself, but the main thing is I really think that it's important to put the space. That doesn't need to be everything saying, told very clear, and doesn't need to be everything, I don't like this when you have to get it. Who cares, like whatever. I feel like this is like in poetry, why? Like it can be a rhythm, can be just like two images which you could put together and become story for me something else, for you something else, for everybody something else. So I don't know, I don't hanging on this for every possible way to that's only one right, this is only this and doesn't exist nothing else. So I want to let things open and in many layers so people can choose speaking and creating their own experience. I don't know. Then I hope, like, I don't know, they get some satisfaction from that. So something, some story, some impulse which we take further, or some memory or whatever. But that's, I think, how I see this.
Thank you. We still have 45 minutes left, but you should, after we thank our wonderful guests, we should mingle, have some more hors d'oeuvres. There's a bar, there are books to be perused, more art. We can continue the conversation as we mill about. So if you will join me in thanking them, I will give them a little